Patrick V, and you're part of the podcast Reimagining Leadership, where my focus is on finding a better way to help individuals develop the behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to want to follow your lead. My guest today is Dr. Andy Young. He is a police officer for the Lubbock, Texas Police Department, and he's also the author of two books, Fight or Flight and When Every Word Counts. And his last book, When Every Word Counts, is the book that I actually interviewed him on this podcast about. And what's interesting about this is that this interview is prior to the unrest that's going on right now as it relates to George Floyd, who was murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis a few weeks ago. What I think is interesting about this podcast is that it provides, I think, another face in regards to the challenges that police officers face, and also the tools and skills that are necessary if we really are going to address this crisis, continuing crises. It really is about developing a better skill set. And in this case, it's around listening and how important that is. And that's what you're going to hear in this podcast as Dr. Andy Young talks about the focus that he puts on the training that he provides the officers within his department. I know you'll find it valuable. So let's get into it. Andy, thank you for taking the time today to be on the podcast, Reimagining Leadership. I just happened to get a post yesterday of your new book that's come out and really thought it was such a great opportunity to have you on. A lot of your work is in the area of negotiation and conflict, and we're certainly in a place right now of crisis, I think, for many people. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to have you to come on, talk a little bit about your background, how you ended up where you are, and then go into your book.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you having me, and happy to share a little bit today. My background is in counseling. So I went to school to become a mental health professional and do counseling in an office. And one day I was minding my own business, going to church, and the chief of police secretary came to me and said, "Hey, Andy, I hear you're working on your counseling license. How would you like to join the patrol division of the Lubbock Police Department and help officers with domestic dispute calls that they're going to? The chief is really sick of sending his officers to these domestic disputes over and over and over again. He wants to get you mental health types in there so he can get his officers back in service and do what they're trained to do. Would you like to become part of the patrol division of the police department?" And I thought that was the coolest thing I ever heard. I was like, sign me up.
And that was back when, a little before 2000 or right around?
Yeah, the summer of 2000. So this is my 20th year with the Lubbock Police Department.
Yeah, well, happy anniversary for that. And I will say that your chief, that's pretty forward thinking to really come up with that idea.
It was. I think it was born out of frustration more than anything, because he only had so many guys and they can't arrest people for what was going on at these calls. So just in a moment of desperation, he's like, well, let's get some counselor people in there so my cops can do what they're supposed to do.
So how did that go?
It's gone well. The program is still going. I have about 35 mental health professionals who will respond to calls and requests from police officers to show up at their scenes. We probably have 200 calls for service a year, and it's not just domestic disputes. It could be domestic violence. It could be a death. Any call where an officer thinks, you know what, having a mental health professional or a grief counselor here, that might be helpful.
In your line of work, obviously, I know you do work with the fire department as well. Obviously, years ago, I was a firefighter first starting out, and I remember, those, if there were events that could be very traumatic, having to have an outlet to be able to deal with those things.
Exactly. I was at the Lubbock Police Department for less than a year, and we had an officer killed in the line of duty at a SWAT call out where one officer accidentally shot and killed another one. And it devastated the department. And at that time, we were just then trying to put together mental health services for police officers, especially after a traumatic event. And man, it was trial by fire.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Many of my good friends are part of the Portland Police Department where I am here, and they deal with a lot. There's a lot of traumatic incidents going to suicides or drug overdoses or domestic violence, right? Or seeing kids that are abused. It's tough.
It's really tough. And law enforcement, they see that 1% of society that most people don't believe exists, and they see it over and over and over again. It takes its toll.
Yeah. Which brings me to a question in terms of that. I imagine much of your work is around how do you help to separate that, right? So that I see that 1%, but I don't just become jaded that everybody's like that.
That's right. Well, I get to speak at our police academy to the new officers and families coming out on the street. My advice to them is, you have your work, you have your friends at work, but you also got to have normal life. You've got to mitigate that 1% with being at home with your kids, doing normal things, going out and not being on duty, not being on guard, but you've got to fight to be a normal person because you get enough of that at work.
Yeah, I was a volunteer for a group up here called the Center for Grieving Children, which was all around families that had lost a loved one, not just children, but it could be adults that lost a spouse. The whole point of that was the importance of being able to talk about it.
Exactly. And cops, they're not, inherently open.
Right.
And when I started, walking around the police department, everybody knew, well, there's the mental health guy, and the nonverbals were outstanding. They would rather I be somewhere else.
Just declare him.
Right. But then, showing up at these calls, then showing up at SWAT call outs and doing the same kind of work that they're doing, that kind of opened the door. And they're like, you know what? This guy knows what we go through. If I need to talk to somebody, I'll sit down in his office and talk to him because I don't have to get him up to speed on what we've been going through.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, and fortunately, in this observation that I've seen is much more, and I do a lot of work within organizations around emotional intelligence, that there's more openness to emotional intelligence and understanding self-awareness and awareness of others. And one thing that stands out when you talk about being able to discuss these things is we know so much more about the research now in terms of the impact that that has when we're able to verbalize things, and it reduces our level of stress.
Exactly. I had an officer who was in a traumatic incident right after I started, and he came and sat down in my office 18 years later. He said, Andy, I knew I needed to talk to you way back then, but the rah, 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 I can get through it. But when he came in and finally just talked it all out, it was amazing to watch how curative that was.
Yeah, totally. Do you notice a difference in terms of, do you have many females that are part of the department? Is it easier for them to come and have those conversations?
Not necessarily, because sometimes we eat our own. Sometimes there's
Great
that
point.
personal friendly fire. And being a female in law enforcement, it has its added layers to
Yeah,
it.
very interesting.
So I would say that they're on guard as well.
So you then became an author. This is your second book. So the
Yes.
first is Fight or Flight, and now this one, When Every Word Counts, right? And the
Yes.
subtitle is An Insider's View of Crisis Negotiation. What prompted you to start writing in the first place?
So I'm going to these calls, and for my own personal benefit, I started writing them down because it was traumatic stuff. And after a number of years, I had a big old stack of stories, and I'm a teacher at heart. That's my day job. And I thought, you know what? It's been therapeutic for me to write these down. It might be helpful for other people to hear these stories too. They might learn something about law enforcement and what goes on behind the yellow tape. They might even learn some things that be helpful in their own life, be it like crisis intervention or grief or whatever. And so that first book was born out of my own therapeutic effort to write the stories down, and then kind of the teaching effort to, well, maybe this will help other people. Let me write it down and let me publish it and see what happens. The second book, our negotiating team has been really busy since the first book came out. And I'm like, I got to write these stories down because, again, some of this stuff you can't believe. And I've been speaking at a lot of negotiator conferences. And so to be able to put something in their hands that they can take home and hopefully use on their calls. So that's where the books came from.
Sure. I love the title of it, When Every Word Counts, because so much of my work is around that too, of words have weight, I think, in some regards of what is said and when it's said. I would imagine it means a little more in your line of work in terms of the difference between a success and further crisis.
Patrol officers, they have their mentality about how to control a situation and fix a thing and command presence and all that kind of stuff, which is really the opposite of my training, which is listening and empathy and tree hugging and stuff like that. But for an officer to shift gears from one to the other when it's needed, that's kind of where it starts. And so an officer will come in and say, hey, I need you to put your hands behind your back. And to switch from that to, hey, maybe we can sort this out together. Two different ways of trying to get to the same thing. And yeah, so there you have the title.
It's so interesting that you say that. And again, I will relate this back to an office setting where you might have a manager that has the authority to tell somebody what to do,
Right.
but there's also a skill set to get somebody to want to do what you're asking them to do. You're going to end up in the same place,
Right.
but if you can get them to want to do it,
Right.
it's going to be a lot easier on everybody.
Can I tell a story from parenting that makes the point?
Love it. Yes, please.
Okay. So my wife, she has the command presence thing. And she says to my 8-year-old and 5-year-old, all right, get your stuff. We're going to go to the park. Get your shoes on. We're going to have a good time. Go get in the car. And my 8-year-old and my 5-year-old, they lose their mind. They throw a fit and they run off crying. And she looks at me and she's all frustrated. I'm just trying to help. And I just want everyone to have a good time. And I'm just trying to be good and blah, blah, blah. And I'm a jerk. And so I turned to her and I winked and I said, watch this. And I yell across the house to my 8-year-old and I say, hey, Ella, what do you think about going to the park today so you can do what you want to do, like go ride your bike? And the crying stops and she says, that's a great idea, Dad. And she runs and gets her shoes on. And my wife looks at me like, I'm going to stab you.
I was going to say, now you need your own skills.
And I winked at her again. I said, hey, Jonathan, because he loves, a good time and he wants to be with other people. I said, hey, Jonathan, Ella's going to go to the park and I bet she's going to have a good time. Do you want to go with her? And he's like, yeah, I want to go have a good time too. And yeah, my wife, she almost killed me.
I was going to say, Daddy's not going to see Mommy tonight, but you guys have a great time at the park today.
That's right.
Along those lines, when you're sort of out there right now and helping other people in this area, what's the most important thing?
A few things come to mind. So if I could give you a few important things.
Yeah.
It really starts internally. When I show up to a crisis, if I'm freaking out and in crisis too, that's not really going to help anybody. So calm is contagious. If I'm cool, then maybe that'll affect everybody else. And then really it's not about talking, it's about listening. And if people believe that I understand them, if people believe that I have empathy, if I don't have an ulterior motive other than to be here with you to help, that really sets the stage for trying to sort our way through something.
Yeah. When you talk about showing up, and obviously I can't be panicked or agitated myself because that's going to come out. I will often hear of people speaking in ways that if somebody is in an agitated state, trying to talk slower and softer,
yes,
to try and bring them down as well.
Yeah, we like using the phrase the late night DJ voice.
I love that.
You're right. But just to have a tone of voice that's a sedative might, start getting things going the right direction.
Yeah. And it's not going to work every time, right? But it's a...
And if you're absurd about it, people will catch you speaking and think you're an idiot. So you don't want to do that either.
You're in the wrong line of work. Maybe you should be a DJ.
Where have you been smoking pot? What are you doing?
You mentioned listening as well. And again, in the work that I do, I will often say, I think listening is a superpower. That if you really understand how to listen to other people, a lot of the conflict that we run into can resolve itself.
Yeah. And one of the first things is not to be thinking about what do I want to say in response, but how do I understand what is being said and say it back to somebody so they know I understand too.
You hit on such an important point, and I'd love to, if you can, why is that so important, right? Yeah. To not be thinking about what am I going to say next?
Well, you're already talking to somebody who has something to say and is thinking about what they want to say next. And so if we have two people doing the same thing, we'll probably end up missing each other.
Yeah.
As a marriage and family therapist, I see that all the time. You have two people who are emotional, who want to be heard, and so they just yell louder.
Right. Right. And neither one. Right. And that's where I'm in full agreement. I think that oftentimes hearing somebody and listening to somebody is not the same thing. And that if we're suspending what we want to say next and really trying to listen to somebody else, you're
Right.
probably hearing some things that you would have missed.
That's right. And I think people notice when you are suspending your agenda and your needs in order to listen to them. So you've already given them something.
Yeah, it lowers it. And I know my own experience, you can generally tell when somebody is really listening to you
Yeah.
or they're not listening, or they're just sort of humoring you, listening to
Right.
you. It's not the same thing.
No,
It oftentimes amps it.
exactly. And when a cop shows up to a call and he just wants to get the information so he can write his report and go on to the next thing, you wonder why he's getting in a fist fight.
That's so true, right? Because the person's saying, you're not really appreciating my side of this, what I'm going through right now.
That's right. And I'm afraid, I'm hurt, I'm angry. I don't want to go to jail. I mean, it's a quick way to get everybody amped up.
Yeah. How do you work with the people within your department to help them develop these skills, right? Because you could have people out there saying, I can't do that. I
Right.
don't have the skill set to do that. That's not something where do we even start with that?
Yeah. I get to teach our 40-hour mental health police officer certification course. And so those officers who want to do that will come and sit down for 40 hours and learn these things. And I just ask them, try this on your calls, try this with your wife, try this with your kids, and just experiment and come back and tell me what happens. And when they give it a test drive, they come back and are like, holy crap, Andy, my 15-year-old actually said, I'm sorry. What is this wizardry? And that's where it starts. Just
Yep.
experiment with it. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to give you tools for a toolbox.
Which that in and of itself disarms individuals,
Right.
because it's not you trying to force
Yeah.
you have to do this. This is the way to go. It's to say, here's an opportunity to improve what's in your toolbox now. If there was a better solution to this, wouldn't you want to know it?
Of course. Problem is, there are people in my field who come in and like, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and I have the authority to tell you what to do. And that's the quickest way to shut down a cop. They don't want to hear that.
Right. Right. And I think no more than your line of work or my line of work, you can run into people that think, I don't need this. I've been doing
Right.
this long enough. I get by the way I am right now.
Great. Then keep what you got and let me know when it breaks down.
That's right. And it probably already has. It
Right.
probably
But we
already has.
won't do that in a public setting.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about stories. Is there one that stands out for you that you look and is maybe most gratifying for you in terms of a situation that you dealt with or?
Mm. I mean, there have been a number of cases of talking to somebody who was suicidal and contemplating their death in an immediate fashion, be it jumping off a bridge or something like that. And in those cases, and some of those conversations, one lasted 2 hours, one lasted 7 hours. For those to be so close to death, and then for that person to make the decision to come down, and we continue to talk to them. I've talked to them after the fact. There's the immediate gratification of, oh, I'm so glad they didn't make that decision. But then over the long term, they get to see people kind of change their course and many times improve their lives. This is tremendously honoring to be a part of that.
Yeah. And if you look at those things on those people that didn't make the decision that was going to go against what you were there to do, is there a theme that you would think flows through in terms of what made it successful?
It's exactly what we're talking about here. They can't see beyond their pain, and somebody shows up and gives them something that the other people in their life should have been able to give them: respect, understanding, time, patience, caring. And so we show up and do that because we indeed do care, and that starts to cure things. It's really quite simple, but in our society, when things get horrible, those are some of the first things to go.
It's so interesting. Specifically talking about listening, are there certain things that you work with those individuals to help people to understand? How do you build this muscle? Because I believe listening is a muscle. How do you help people to strengthen this?
Yeah, well, of course, there's the practice and having the right mentality going into it. And another key point, especially in assisting officers with this, is to listen for emotion. Police officers aren't typically listening for emotion, but when I come at you and I say, I can't believe this is going on, I've just shared my emotions with you. And for me to get out my finger and say, hey, I need you to back up, that's the exact opposite of what's going to settle this down. But if I say in a, nice, calm manner, man, I see that you're very angry. Can you tell me what's going on? A totally different approach to somebody coming at me in anger. And typically people respond in kind. Well, I'm just angry because blah, blah, blah. Well, now we're grooving.
Yeah. It's so interesting. There are so many parallels
Yes,
between in your world or in an office setting where you might be dealing with an employee that's completely agitated or upset or angry about a situation, and to have a manager or somebody say to them, you know what, with what you know or with what this situation is, I'd be upset myself, or I can see why you're upset.
exactly. And that manager has a choice in that moment. I can be here for the job or the institution or whatever, or I can be here for this person who is in front of me and try to navigate it from there.
Yeah. Which is a great point too. If you think about this, right? We're all in this together. We have different roles that we play, but in a sense, we're all human beings trying to figure this thing out.
That's right. And I may work for a company and go, yeah, I can see why this rule makes you mad, but here's the other side of the coin as well. Again, that's a sorting it out kind of thing as opposed to authoritarian. Well, you just need to, suck it up and smile.
Yeah. Another thing in terms of what I hear you saying is, and it probably doesn't happen the same way, but on some levels is asking people their thought. You did it with your kids, right? But if you were in my shoes, how would you want to be addressed? What would you do about this? You
Right.
know?
Respect and honoring people's autonomy, it doesn't cost us anything.
Yeah.
To recognize that and respect it, again, that is such a great starting place if you're trying to assist somebody who's having a tough day.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. One last thing as we're sort of wrapping things up here in terms of challenges that you run into. What's the biggest challenge for you in terms of the line of work that you're doing?
Uh, People who are in extreme psychiatric distress. So you have somebody who is homeless, or they have troubles going on at home, and they have a diagnosed condition like bipolar disorder or major depression or a psychotic disorder. They're on drugs, they have schizophrenia, or they have a alcohol problem or a drug problem. If it was just one thing, that would be,
Yeah.
it, it's not that it's easier, but when you have multiple layers of difficulties to sort through, that's many times why it takes 7 hours just to have a conversation.
Yeah. You hit on something I think would be really important in terms of awareness of others and teaching that is because how do you help people to understand or be able to decipher what's going on here? Is this person having a psychotic episode? Are they diabetic and they're having a diabetic incident? You know, they have low blood sugar.
Yeah.
That is right.
Right.
Different situations.
Well, it reminds me of a story, if that's all right.
I love it.
State troopers had a driver pulled over on the highway, and they're yelling at the driver, "Get out of your car, get out of your car." Driver's not getting out, and they're like, "Ooh, this is a tactical situation." They call in more people. It's amping up, and the driver is just sitting at the driver's in the driver's seat, hand on the steering wheel, eyes forward, not moving. And they're thinking, this guy's disobeying. Maybe we need to go in hard and fast. Maybe we should send in the dog. And we're like, let's slow this down. And so they walk some people up behind ballistic shields, and they try to talk to the person. The person is a stone looking straight
Yeah.
forward, hands on the steering wheel. And eventually they hold up a dry erase board and they write on it, "Please talk to us. Please come out." The person slowly turns their head. They read it, and they do sign language. The person is deaf, and that is why they're non-responsive. And obviously they're scared.
Yeah.
And so once we knew what was going on, it wasn't my story, but once they knew what was
Yeah.
going on, oh, this person's death, it changed everything.
One of the things that you said in there was let's slow things down, right? You need to
Um,
do that, right? There's reacting
yeah,
and then there's responding, which takes that what else might be going on here, which to me is part of listening. It's not with
right.
our ears, but it is a form of listening where we're listening besides
That's
just
right.
what our gut is.
And the difficulty in law enforcement is, what situation do I have here? Is this lethal and I'm about to get killed, or do I have the latitude to slow it down and talk?
Right. Which, and again, to me, that was sort of the question on that is to say, I think that can be really difficult, right? When who's to say which way this is going to go to really be able to work that muscle? How do you develop that?
That's right. So you're looking for opportunities that are clearly safe to do so, and then you gain your experience and you get better at risk assessment. Then you know when you need a hammer and when you need to just listen.
Yeah. Andy, I've enjoyed this so much. I think what you're doing is so important. If people want to reach out to you, certainly get your book, what's the best way to do that?
So I have a website for my book, and it is drandyyoung.com, DRANDYYOUNG.com, and I'd be happy to sign a book for you.
Great. And I'll have that in the show notes as well. So
Very cool.
really appreciate all that you're doing. I think especially probably in the times that we're in right now, when we talk about stress and crisis, I'm sure your skill set is even more needed at this point.
Yeah, I am very busy. I still enjoy the work after 20 years. But then there's that part, I guess ER docs are the same way. I love being an ER doc, but I wish I didn't have to do this today.
Yeah. Again, thank you for your time. Wishing you all the best. Great success with the book.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
We are certainly in such high tension times right now. And Dr. Andy Young really outlined, I think, some very important things around how we listen to other people. Obviously, he speaks about it from a standpoint of professionally, his career, and trying to reduce the anxiety and high tension that they might be experiencing and how to do that. And I truly believe if more people were to really develop these skills, a lot of the conflict that we currently experience would resolve itself. And I don't think that's a Pollyanna approach either, because really what tends to happen, and as he said in his own conversations, is that oftentimes people just need to feel heard. And when that doesn't happen, oftentimes bad things come from that. If you know somebody that you think would benefit from listening to this podcast, I would ask you to forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe, and it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment regarding this or any other episode. And until that next episode, I hope you're able to go out there and rise above your best. Peace.